Okay, now we're at a point in HTML where we've covered all of the real essentials except for HTML5 exclusive elements. So really a deep dive on HTML5 is all that we really have left to do. We've covered text elements, text formatting, presentation elements like lists, images, tables, etc. We've even gone into forms and dabbled in SEO with the previous lesson on the elements that go inside the head tag. Now we're ready to think about our workflow. And what I mean by workflow is how you actually customize your HTML, both from the perspective of writing the HTML and CSS, and also from the perspective of how it looks in the web page. So let's start with customizing our workflow inside of brackets first. Now, instead of creating our HTML file and start writing code, note that I have created an HTML file for this lesson, JS in HTML.html. You can call it whatever you want, but we are going to be dabbling in a little bit of JavaScript to customize our workflow. But before we do that, I want to talk about extensions in brackets. And I'm going to press this icon right here. And we hadn't really dealt with some really useful extensions up until now because some extensions, specifically the extension that we're going to install now called Emmet, is actually a little bit of a crutch. It definitely improves your workflow. But when you're actually learning a new language, it almost makes it too easy so that you may not pay attention to the syntax. But now that we're far enough in and we've become experts in the syntax, let's go ahead and download Emmet. Just press the install button right here, and then brackets will automatically install the extension and let us know when the installation is successful. And just to make sure, let's go into our installed, and we see that the extension is enabled, so now we can go ahead and close it. So what did installing Emmet do? Before, we would normally start out by writing our tag with a less than sign and type HTML and then a greater than sign, and then the tag would be auto-completed. Well, it turns out we can actually take out one keystroke every time we are writing a tag. For our head and body tag, let's just write head, and now when I press tab, Emmet automatically completes the head tag for me. Similarly, with a title, I'm just going to write title, and then I'll press tab, and Emmet will automatically complete the title for me. So for our title, let's call this page Customizing Your HTML Workflow. And now let's create a body. And we're not going to write anything in the body yet because we're going to spend a little bit of time inside the head tag specifically discussing two really interesting JavaScript libraries that we can add that will give our HTML some really interesting features. The first library I want to talk about is called Highlight.js. And this library is especially useful if you want to write, for example, blog posts about writing code. Suppose I wanted to create a blog post about writing HTML. I would want my code to show up with syntax highlighting, similar to how it shows up inside of brackets. By default, HTML's code tag shows monospace text, which is a great start, but it doesn't necessarily have all of the features. So on the highlightjs.org homepage, I'm going to click on Get Version 9.1 button, and it says a pre-built version is available with 23 commonly used languages. So we're going to copy these two links here. I'm going to copy the link tag and also the script tag, and I'm going to paste those two inside our head. Now, by itself, that's not really going to do anything. We need to add one more line of setup in order to make Highlight.js work properly for us. And that's going to go inside the body tag, or you can add the script tag in the head tag too. But notice all the way on the bottom it says here, refer to the usage documentation. We actually will need to refer to the usage documentation. One of the following styles and calling init highlight on load. Okay, where's init highlight on load? Here it is. Script init highlight on load. So we're going to add this script tag, and just for separation purposes, I'm going to add some extra spacing towards the bottom of our body and create this script tag. And notice that it is syntax highlighted inside brackets as JavaScript. So now let's refer to a little bit more of the usage documentation, and says, oh, okay, we have to have a pre-tag and then a code tag inside the pre-tag. We haven't used the pre-tag before, but don't worry too much about it. It rarely comes up except in libraries, and that's actually one of the reasons that highlight.js is using the pre-tag, because most people don't really use the pre-tag in normal HTML code. So now let's go back to our web page and note that we haven't really seen anything yet, but we do see a little bit of spacing created by the pre-tag. So let's go ahead and add the code tag inside the pre-tag. Now inside the code tag, let's add some HTML code. This should be familiar by now. Less than sign, paragraph, greater than sign, and then we're going to have a closing p tag, less than sign, greater than sign, and then let's say, look mom, syntax highlighted text. But it doesn't look syntax highlighted. So what's going on here? Well, it turns out when I save and reload the page, refresh the page, it actually does become syntax highlighted text. However, HTML itself doesn't really have that much syntax highlighting that's needed. Sure, we could add maybe a class of text, and just FYI, class is a global attribute that you can add to any tag in HTML, similar to the ID property that we added to our form when covering accessibility. So again, when I save and refresh, the word class is syntax highlighted, and the word text is also syntax highlighted, a slightly different color. But as I said before, HTML doesn't have too many properties that need syntax highlighting. So let's try a preview of CSS. For CSS, we can specify a tag and then give it a background color property. We can also give it a font family, Comic Sans, which is a font family that you should never use, by the way. So when we save and refresh, the CSS is highlighted, and now we see the strings inside of quotations also having a separate color. So this is an introduction to syntax highlighting, really helpful if you want to write blog posts about writing code or HTML or CSS, or share your own journey of learning HTML and CSS. The Highlight.js library is really useful for that. Okay, there's one other JavaScript library that I want to cover that's also plug and play that you can just add right into HTML, and that's called MathJax. And MathJax is really useful for formatting math equations. So to add MathJax into our HTML, let's go over to the Getting Started page for MathJax. It's under docs.mathjax.org/en/latest/start.html, and inside it gives us to jumpstart using CDN.js. You can accomplish the first step by putting script into the head block of your document, and let's do exactly that. We'll copy over the script, paste it inside our head element. Let's do a little bit of formatting here to give it some nice spacing. Okay, so we now have a MathJax script tag. Let me just make this well commented so that we know MathJax loads here, and then Highlight.js loads here. Okay, now let's go down to the bottom of our body. Let's keep the script tag for Highlight.js towards the bottom, and now I'm going to go back to our web page. Now, in order to add MathJax to a web page, you start by declaring a tag, and there are two special characters for indicating that you're about to write an equation. The first displays the equation on its own line, so this is an equation displayed on its own line, And to do that, the character for that is the $, double money, and inside we can write a special math formatting language called LaTeX. And in LaTeX, to indicate a fraction, /frac12. You might notice it's not really showing up, it's not really doing anything. That's because we need to reload our page, save. I pressed Command S, Control S for Windows users. Be sure to save your HTML file first, and then the dot that's on the left of the file will disappear. And then refresh. And now we can see that MathJax formatted our LaTeX equation into a nice fraction of 1/2. MathJax also support inline formatting, quadratic equation. So let's write out the quadratic equation that we learn in Algebra 1 or Algebra 2 in an inline format. And to do an inline equation format, it's / open parentheses / close parentheses. Now I'm not going to give a full tutorial on LaTeX here, but I do want to show you that in order to write a more complex fraction, you need curly braces. The numerator will have -b, the plus or minus symbol is /PM, and then we need a square root symbol, and it's going to be a pretty long square root, so we need another curly braces. So it's -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and now we go to the denominator of our fraction. This whole thing has been inside the square root symbol, and then this whole thing has been the numerator of our fraction. So now let's go to the denominator of our fraction and say all over 2a. So now when I save my file, that little black dot is going to disappear, and when I refresh, we see the quadratic equation appear. Should be the quadratic formula, by the way, not quadratic equation. Quadratic equation is different. And notice that when I change text on a page, brackets' live preview just goes nuck and futz, and we have to refresh, save and refresh the page. So those are some examples of really great JavaScript libraries that you can use inside of your HTML, even without knowing JavaScript. A lot of programming, web development, web design is about standing on the shoulders of giants. And what that means is you basically borrow from the work that other people have done and incorporate that into your own work. And that's exactly what we're doing. So next time, we're going to dive deeper into the new features that HTML5 comes with. And we're even going to introduce some really interesting new tags.